Hi, I'm Grant from Blackmagic Design, and in this video we're going to show you how to set up your ATEM production switcher. Setting the switcher up is not very difficult, but it's a very powerful. There's all sorts of powerful combinations of control and of course the features that switches have. So what we'll do is to get started, in the probably simplest way possible is to, what you really want to do is power the switcher on, and then I reckon plug in the multi-view. That'll show you that the switcher is functioning. So we've got a television here. It's a HDMI television, just a standard television. We've got the HDMI connection plugged in. And what we'll do is we'll plug in the multi-view, which is on the back panel. So I'll swing the switcher around. And you can see on the back panel here, we've got two HDMI outputs. One of them is the program HDMI out, so you can record from external HDMI recorders. And then there's the multi-view HDMI out here. There's an SDI output, but we're not going to use that in this case. So what I'll do is I'll plug in our HDMI connection. There it is there. And we should see on the screen the multi-view come out. Now, if you see that multi-view, your switch is working. So that's a really good first step. And you should see some labels and some inputs. On the multi-view, there you can see 8 of your sources and your program and preview. So, a lot of people run just a small television and a switcher for the small portable setups. But I reckon this is a very good first step to get running, make sure your switch is on, powered up and working. So now we've done that, the second step is to plug in a keyboard. Now I've got a hardware keyboard here, so we'll plug that in because they've come pre-configured from the factory. So if you plug that keyboard in, and you'll get immediate control. So what I'll do is I'll grab an Ethernet cable, which we've got here, bit of a long one, and I'll plug it into the connector on the back of the keyboard, and I'll get the other end and I'll plug it into the back of the switcher. So I'll swing the switcher around again so you can see the back, and there's the keyboard connection at the top, and I'll plug that in. You should see some lights come on when you plug that connection in so you can see that it's communicating. Now, I've done that and everything's working really well because the keyboard's come up. Now, as I was saying before, the keyboard and the switcher come set up, so they should just talk. And now I've got all the control here. I can see that everything's working, which is fantastic. So the next step, of course, is you really want to get your computer connected so you can get control and download media, play with the audio mixer, and all the other features. So now there is a little bit more work in that because you've got to set the Ethernet address of the computer. So I'll grab another network cable, which I've got here. And this is a Mac. I'm a bit of a Mac nut. So, but we've obviously got Windows software comes with the switcher as well. So you can run Mac or Windows, and they're very similar to set them up. So to do this, I'll plug in the little pod here to get the Ethernet on the Mac. So that's plugged in there. On the other end, I'll plug into the keyboard. There's two network sockets on the back of the keyboard. So you can plug into the other one and it'll loop the computer's communication through the keyboard into the switcher. So the next step is to get my network settings on the computer. So I'll go down into the system preferences and then I'll go into network settings, which is this one here. Now I've already set that up because I cheated, but we set this up before. But in your case, what you want to do is set your a number in the range of everything. So the keyboard is set up to be 192.168.10.10 when it comes out of the factory, and the switcher is set up to be 192.168.10.240. So all you really need to do is have a different number for your computer. So I've got 192.168.10.15 here. You could type in 50 if you wanted, which is what we recommend in the manual. And I'll apply that. And then it should just all work. So we want to check that out and see if it really does work. As long as the last digit is different on everything, then it'll all work. And the first 3 digits are the same. So I'll quit my system preferences and I'll go into my ATEM switcher software, and then I've got the control panel application here, so I'll launch that. Now, if that comes up and shows the switcher, which it did, then everything's communicating. So the software control panel is talking to the switcher and the hardware control panel is talking to the switcher. And you can use them. If I move them up and down, you can see that they're moving in sync with each other as I move them up and down. So they're both controlling the switcher. Now you can have more computers controlling the switcher. You can have more keyboards controlling the switcher because this is Ethernet. In fact, you could have this keyboard on the other side of the planet talking to the switcher on this side of the planet. Because it's a network connection. This is as hard as it kind of gets to set it up. But you can pretty much do anything because you can put it on the internet. So it's very, very flexible and very powerful because you can just keep adding control panels. And you'll see when I show you some of the other features how powerful that can be, because you can have more than one computer and they can be doing different jobs on the same switcher. So, of course, what happens if this doesn't work? I mean, this all worked because it was, set up. You just had the address for the computer, the keyboard and the switcher were new, so they already came preset. But what happens if someone else has been using this equipment? What happens if they've changed the settings? What happens if you want to put it on your network and you want to change some of the settings? So to do that, there's another bit of software it comes with the switcher, and it's called ATEM Setup Utility. Now what that lets you do is talk straight to the switcher and set the network settings in the switcher. If you can talk to the switcher and set those settings, then you can confirm what the settings are because they might have been changed, or you can just set them to what you want them to be. So what I'll do is I'll plug in the USB because this works with USB. So I've got my little USB cable here, and this will let me basically plug into the switcher just like you plug into a printer or a mouse or keyboard. So I'll plug in this socket here, which is on the back. So on this model of switcher, this is a 1ME Production Studio 4K. So the socket's down the bottom here, but it can vary a bit on different models of ATEM switcher. So there I am, I'm plugged into there, and I'll plug the other end into my computer, just like a keyboard or a printer, and it plugs into the USB. I'm the wrong way around, I'll plug that in. There it is. And now what I can do is I can run the ATEM setup utility on the software, and it'll talk straight to the switcher and give me the Ethernet settings. So there they are. So you can see the switch has been set to 192.168.10.240, and there's some other settings there as well. Now you can change that to anything you like. If you want to put this stuff on the network, then you can talk to your system administrator and get these details and enter them in here. You just change these settings by typing in. But in this case, the switch is set to 240, the panel's set to 10, the computer is set to 50. They're all talking to each other and everything's fine, so I don't need to do anything. The other thing I didn't have to do here is I didn't have to update the software. This utility is how you update the software in the switcher and the keyboard. So if you get a switcher, you really want to run the latest version of software because we're adding features all the time. Just go to our website and download the latest software. And after you've installed it, you can run this utility on the switcher, plugged in with the USB cable, and you can also run it on the keyboard and double check to see if there's the latest software. It'll tell you if it's not, and it'll download into new software into the switcher or control panel. You can also downgrade. If you've decided that the new software's got some feature that's changed, you don't want to really use that software, you can go back and you can downgrade. You can download an older version of software. You can reload the firmware in both the keyboard and control panel. Sorry, the control panel and the switcher, and it'll work. So this is the utility you need to do to make sure the software is updated here, and also make sure the network settings are updated here, and also for setting the software in the control panel. But in this case, everything's fine, so we'll just quit it. Now, that's what to do if the switcher network settings are wrong. But what happens if the keyboard's network settings are wrong? Well, what you can do, this is actually running, so you can push both buttons down, and a little network setting button pops up here, but we don't need to do that because this is running. So what I'll do is I'll unplug the keyboard setting connections, and I'll go back to a situation where the keyboard's not talking. And of course, I've unplugged the cable, so that's why it's not talking. But you can see the only button that appears is network settings. So if you go to the network settings here, you can see you've got your network settings. And you can change some of them. So you've got different buttons there. You can push the button and you can just dial up the network settings. So if your keyboard doesn't work, then you need to change the network settings. You can use the USB software to check the switcher, but you can use the front of the control panel to check the control panel. And also it's worth checking that all the software's up to date. You'll get a message on the keyboard and also on the software if the software's not up to date. It'll tell you there's a software mismatch, and then you can update using the setup utility. So that's that. I'll go out of these network settings, and I'm back to the control panel. It's all working. And now we'll get on to some of the other features. So I think one of the things that, when I was younger, I used an AB direct type switcher. It was a small switcher. And that was really how I used to do live production. I used to do horse racing, and we used to do, theatre groups and a lot of that kind of stuff. And in my teens, and I had a lot of fun doing that. It was enjoyable. But, when I first saw, these modern high-end switches, it was a bit of a shock because, when you're adjusting the T-bar here, everything kind of flips over, and it was kind of like, how does this work? So the reason this works differently to maybe a sort of lower-end, switcher is because it's a program preview style of operation. So it's worth talking about that a little bit because it's a bit different to an AB direct switcher. An AB direct switcher is when you've got, a selection of what source on the top, and you've got a selection of a different source on the bottom, and when the T-bar is at the top, it's the top source. When the T-bar goes to the bottom, it's the bottom source. And that's quite simple, and a lot of people prefer that way. It was the way the very basic switches worked when I was, young. But when I saw these program preview type switches, it was like, wow, this is all sort of strange. It flips over. And so you kind of think, what's going on here? And then you realize that it's a very different way of working. So, experienced high-end switcher guys know this, but to get your head around how this works, if you haven't used this style of switcher before, what's really happening here is the program row of buttons is what's on air. This is showing you what's actually on air now. The preview row down the bottom here is showing you what's about to go on air. So you can change things on here. And I don't really have any cameras hooked up at the moment, but you can change the source on here, and then when you hit cut, it goes on air and switches up. So what's really happening here is you make your selection of what you want, and then you push the cut button to turn it on air, and it'll move up to the top, and then what was previously on the program row comes down. So we've got a bit better of an explanation of how that works in the instruction manual, so it's worth reading up on that. But it's quite simple, and it's quite nice because you know what's on air, and you know you can push sources on the bottom here and look at them on the preview display, and you can then activate them by pushing cut, or you can do a transition by pushing the auto button, and that'll transition based on what you've set for your transition. So this is a program preview style switcher, but you can also change it to work in AB Direct if you like. So check out the manual for that, and I can show a bit more on that in a second. But what we'll do now is we'll try loading up some graphics. I think, actually, the first step we'll do is we'll set the switcher video standard, because there's a very good chance it'll be running a different video standard to what you want to use. So the easy way to do that is I'll go back into my system preferences because I unplugged the keyboard, so I just want to check here to make sure everything's plugged in. And there it is. And it's not really working, so I'll unplug it again and I'll plug it back in, which is the sort of thing that can happen when you unplug things. And what I'll do is I'll change that number. Oops. Apply. There it goes. I just changed the number. Oh, it came back up. There it goes. So I didn't change the number, I changed the number of the other one. Anyway, so we've got that number back up again. When you unplug the cable, sometimes the Mac can take a little bit of time to get its number back, but just go back into the settings and set the number, and it'll come back up again. So it's kind of good to see that. So we've got our keyboard working, we've got our control panel working. The cables are plugged back in again, so it's all running. So what we want to do is, if you go into the settings tab, there's a settings tab at the bottom here, and that's where you set your switcher settings. So you can see this area here, and there's a menu here. Now this is an Ultra HD 6 gig switcher, so we've got quite a range of video standards, all the way from standard definition through to 720p, 1080i, 1080p, and all the way up to Ultra HD formats. So you can select a wide range. In this case, if you were using it in the US, you'd probably be running 1080i, 5994i, or 1080i, 5994. So that's what we'll set the switcher to. So we'll leave it set to that. But you can set it to anything. If you're running in Europe, you'd probably want to set to 50i, 1080, or if you're running standard definition, maybe still. So that's the next step, and you just hit the set button, and the switch will switch over to that video format. So you really want to do that, because if you start plugging cameras in, you want them to work, and so you want to make sure that you get everything set up the same video standard. If you're doing web-based video, you might want to run 1080, 24 frame. But if you're running for broadcast video, you probably want to run 59.4 or 50i. So that's where to set the video standard. So the next step is we will download a graphic. So if you look at the media page, there's a media page on here, and this is where all the media is. So there's two different ways you can download graphics in the switcher. You can do it directly from within the ATEM control panel software, but there's also a Photoshop plugin. You can do it from that as well. Now, if you're out doing maybe a racing or some kind of event where the information's changing, like whoever wins or whatever's going on, you might want to be running some graphics in real time. So we've got some graphics that are included in the folder with the ATEM software, but you might want to just be rapidly changing. Say you've got a race and somebody wins, you want to put the winner in and immediately download into the switcher so you can put that up on air in the Kia. So in this case, we'll just download a graphic because we're just going to use it as a bit of a test signal. So I'll go into the folder here, and there's a example graphics folder, and I'll go into here, there's Blackmagic Design photos, and I'll download, say, a picture of the audio monitor into the media pool. Now you can see there's a whole lot of little squares here. There's still frame graphics, and there's a couple of motion graphics on this model of switcher. There's the larger areas here for motion graphics, but we'll just load a still frame into the first position of the media pool, and when I release it, it'll download, and you'll see it downloading in. And you'll see there's a little 1 and 2, that's because it's currently set, media player 1 is set to that still frame. And you can change those around. I can set the media player 2 to this position here. But in this case, I've got a picture up in there and I've got it on media player 1. So we should be able to see that on the multi-view because I've set the media player to come up on one of the multi-view views. And then if I bring up the media player in the switcher, I should be able to bring it up in here. Now I've got all the cameras on here, so I'll do it from here. And I'll bring up on the preview row, media player 1, and I can see it in the preview side. And then I'll cut to it by pushing the cut button, and it'll go on air. At the moment I've got black on air, so I'll just cut to that, and it'll go on air, and there it is. And my preview has taken the previous source because it's ready for whatever I'm doing next. Now I can also push the auto button. I've currently got a mix, which is a dissolve selected. So if I push the auto button, it'll cross dissolve. And you can see the cross dissolving between the one of the inputs and the media player. So that's pretty good. I've got a graphic coming out. If I was looking at the program feed out of the switcher, I'd see that full frame graphic. So now we've done that, I reckon what it'd be nice to do is download a different graphic using Photoshop. So what I'll do in this case is I'll go into the folder with the software, and there's an example graphics folder here, and I'll go into there. And I've got some nice wedding graphics down here. I'll open those up with Photoshop. They're Photoshop files, they're multi-layer Photoshop files, and they're in Ultra HD resolution. So if you're running 1080, they'll down-res automatically when you download them into the switcher. But you can also, if you're running Ultra HD, you can use these example graphics on your own work. So I'll open up in Photoshop the graphic, there it is there. And I can customize that because you can do all the alterations because it's still got, the text. It's not actually bitmap, it's, got the fonts and everything in there so you can change it. So what I'll do is I'll go into so just a quick, very quick way of exporting it. If you go into the switcher media pool, I can download that graphic, and I've already been using position 1. You can see I've got the audio monitor graphic in there. It's picked up the file name in the media pool, so it's showing me in here, but all the rest of the positions in the media pool are empty. So I'm going to go into position 2, and I'm going to download my graphic into the switcher, which it should be doing now, and it's done. And I'll close that, and I should be able to see my graphic is on media player 2, I hope. Let's go, oh no, it's not because I select my media player there. Let's go back into this is a good point. So I'll go back into my media window, and I set my media player 2 down here. So what I'll do is I'll go back up to here and I'll select media player 2, and now I should have that graphic loaded in my media player 2, and there it is. You can see it on the multi-view. So if I wanted to go back into the switcher, I can select media player 2 on the preview bus, and then I can do the transition. I can fade between them. Now this is not really realistic. This is a lower third graphic, so normally you'd be overlaying that using the keyer in the over the top of live pictures. But this is a getting started video, so I'm not going to really go into great detail about how to use the keyers and all those features. You can read up. There's a huge section in the manual about how to use each specific feature in the switcher. But you can see I've loaded some graphics in and I've got the graphics coming out, so it's a good start. So I think really the second step, and in fact I can push the transition button here and it works the same way, and cut. And of course, if you want to select, I'll do a few different features. I'll just show you some of the transitions while I'm here. So I can show a dip. That's a dip to black. It's a bit harder to see here. I can set that to a color. You can feed a color generator in, so when you do the dip transition, it dips to the color and it dips back. There's 2 color generators in the switcher, so you can set them to any color you like. I've got a wipe feature, so I'll show the wipe. There it is there. I've got a really daggy looking border on that, which is pretty kind of ugly, but I can set all the transition settings here. I can go into wipe and I can change some of the transition I want. So I'll make it a square. I can also change some of the border settings down here. So there's quite a lot of adjustments. And this is really on the side here. This is all the processing features in the switcher. So you can pretty much go through all the keys, the transitions. And so if I change to different, I'll change to this one, and I might turn off the border. So I'll change the border width to 0 because it's pretty ugly. Now I should just get a pretty normal looking transition. There it is there. And you can change softness and all kinds of features in there. Now what I'll also do is there's a DVE transitions, and these are pretty full on. There's some pretty swooshy looking things here, and if you can see that, you can see that all kind of swooshes out. So it's really kind of, you can make them look pretty bad if you want, but you can also do some pretty nice ones. I think the squeeze can be really useful depending creatively on what you're doing. So that's how to really set some of the different parameters for the transitions. Then you can select the transitions along the row here. You can also select them on these 2 buttons here. So this is where the transitions happen. And then when you do the transition, you'll see it. And you can set it sort of halfway. You can see there it is. So there you go. Next step is we'll plug a camera in, because I think that's a really cool thing to see, because that's the very next thing you'll probably want to do. So what I'll do in this case is I'll get a BNC cable, and I'm going to plug it into input 1 of the switcher, which I'll pull the switcher around and you can have a look. So there's input 1 on the top here. This switcher's got 10 inputs. So I'll plug it in, and now I'll get my camera. So here's a studio camera, HD, so I'll plug that in. And I'll plug the cable into the SDI output socket on the switch here, on the camera here. You can see there's an SDI output socket on here. So I'll plug into that. I can get my connector right, there it is. And I'll move that over there. And I'll bring the switcher back around. So now what's interesting is you haven't seen that come up here, because on this model of switcher, input 1 has got a HDMI input or an SDI input, and you can switch between them. So the switcher has 10 inputs, but input 1, there's an extra HDMI input, because you might want to plug a computer in. And in fact, it's called Mac at the moment because I've had a Mac plugged into it. So what I'll do here is I'll go into my settings, and you can see here's input 1 here. So even though I've got a camera plugged in, you can't see it because I've got the input 1 set to HDMI, and also the label's wrong. So what I'll do is I'll click on this input here and go to SDI, and now I should see it when I click set, and I should see my cameras come up. There it is. Now I could have plugged this camera into any of the inputs, but I thought it'd be interesting to show you input 1 because you can select it. Some of the models of ATEM switches, some of the inputs change. So when you plug in, double check the camera's the same video standard, but also check to see if the input's set right. You might be plugging a HDMI computer in, so you want to make sure it's HDMI. If you're plugging in an SDI camera like the studio camera, make sure it's set to SDI. Now this is set to Mac still, the label's wrong, and you can see that on the multi-view, it says Mac. And not only that, on the keyboard, it says Mac here. So I'll move this camera out of the way a little. In fact, I'll move it right out of the shot because we don't need to see it. We just want to see what it's got. Now, when you set a label, the label comes up on the keyboard, the label comes up on the multi-view, and the label comes up in the switcher view on the software as well. You can see that it says Mac there down the bottom on that input. So you really do want to set the label so that you can set a label that's a genuine description of what you're feeding in. In this case, we'll call it camera 1. So we'll go back to what there would have been when the switcher was new and call it camera 1. So I'll go back to the settings page and I'll call it CM1. And then I'll go set. And that'll now change the label here to camera 1. And of course, the other one's 2, 3, 4. And my label here will be camera 1. And it's set to camera 1 here. And in the other area, it's set to camera 1 back on here. So all the labels will reflect across. So that's definitely worth doing. And you can update your labels pretty easily just by setting them in the settings page. By the way, the other thing I talked about before, the AB direct mode and the program preview style, you can change that on each keyboard. So it's kind of powerful. If you use AB direct, which is what I used to use, although now I've fallen in love with the program preview mode, method of using it. Once you use the program preview mode, it just becomes, you realize why all the high-end guys use it. But, at the same time, you might want to use the AB direct mode, and you might have different type of people working on the same job. So if you go into I'm looking at the ATEM software control here. If you go into the preferences window, you can change some things. And there's a few things you can set here. Of course, you can set the IP address for the switcher, which we before knew that was set to 240. But you can also do some button remapping. And there's a few more other things in here. Check out the instruction manual on this. But you can see in the button mapping, I can make the button number 1 a range of different inputs. So you can get it, you're not really tied. These buttons on the front of the control panels are not tied in to what connectors are on the back of the switcher. You can label the input connectors on the switcher, and you can independently then on each control panel decide where you want those input labels positioned on your buttons. So you might decide that you've got a HDMI input and a couple of other devices, but there's some other devices you're not using. You can just reposition everything on the control panel, and it happens on each control panel. So in here I can do the button remapping, and check out the instruction manual. There's more information in there on the instruction manual. But right down the bottom here, you can see I've got the AB Direct or Program Preview selection. So I can change the way the switcher software works here to AB Direct, and you can also do it on the hardware panel. So that means each individual user can have the switcher tailored the way they want, but it's the same switcher. So you can have 2 or 3 different people using it. So I think that's pretty powerful. I won't change that setting because I'm going to leave it on Program and Preview mode. Okay, so now that's all plugged in, we've got audio coming out of that camera. We might have microphones plugged into it. So you really probably want to have a quick look at the audio mixer built into the ATEM switcher so you can see how that works. So there's the ATEM audio. And what I want to do is I want to plug and turn on input 1, and I should be able to get, now I haven't actually set the audio up on the camera. I don't have a microphone plugged in. There is audio plugged into the switcher, but it's a little bit, it's just front panel audio. If you want to plug in some awesome microphones with, big, windsocks and you're doing outside work, then you can plug in phantom-powered microphones because there's phantom power in the studio camera. But in that case, when you've got that set up, there's the audio mixer here. You just turn on the audio and it'll come into input 1, which we haven't got it set up. But if we had microphones plugged in, you'd see the audio there. There's the master audio here, so you can change that setting. You can see these audio meters in here. On this model of switcher, there's RCA connections on the back, so you can plug in a little cable and run your iPhone into the switcher. Sometimes people do that before a corporate event, and they might want the music coming through the switcher. The other thing, these AFV buttons on the bottom here, when you click those, what will happen is the switcher will fade the audio up and down as you're switching between cameras. So if you're doing, say, sporting events where maybe it's car racing and you've got a few cameras positioned around and you want to hear the car as it's going past the camera, then turning on the audio follow video will mean that when you cut between or fade between the different cameras, you'll get crossfades on the audio between the cameras. So it'll make the audio follow the video source. But in a lot of situations where you're just running, say, maybe a concert, you've got an audio feed coming in from a professional audio guy. In that case, you might just want to use the balanced audio inputs of the switcher, and you just set the input to be on, and in this case like that, and it'll just be using that audio. If you set all those to on instead of audio follow video, it works very much like a typical manual audio mix. You can change all the gains on the different sources and do an audio mix in here. But if you want to see the audio cut with the camera cutting, then you want to turn on the audio follow video mode. So that's really the main features on and the main kind of covering really the core points about how to make your ATEM switcher run. Check out the instruction manual. There's a lot more information in there about how to use the switcher. This is the very basics. There's also tech notes on our website if you need any more information. But I hope this has really helped you get started with your ATEM switcher, and we hope to see that you do massive amounts of live production and have a wonderful time using your switcher.